But it's right on target because we begin a new sermon series today. That's kind of a new year, new you sermon series. And I'm trying to make things very practical, like the 5 minutes a day of silence. What are some other healthy habits and disciplines that we can do in 2020 to live the lives that God has designed us to live? And so on my next slide, I'm kind of giving you the outline for our course curriculum in January. We're going to be calling it Built to Last, Engineering Your Life for Excellence, because every week I'm going to tie it into some kind of engineering or architectural theme with a famous building. And today we're going to talk about resilience, how just showing up is about half of success. So just keep on showing up and being resilient. Next week we're going to look at discipline, how just doing the same thing over and over again can yield great long-term results. And then the process of change, which is hard but important, on the 19th. And finally, planning on the 26th. So that gives you a window on what's ahead. If one of those themes seems interesting to you, bring a friend, and you'll have someone to talk with about it after the service. But you know, today is Epiphany Sunday. And what's interesting is we sing We Three Kings. We see the three kings up there with their gold, frankincense, and myrrh on a banner. But we don't think that these guys were actually kings that came to the manger scene 2,000 years ago. We think they were wise men. And 2,000 years ago, wise men was the title for a scientist. Today we might call them a physicist or a chemist or a biologist. But 2,000 years ago, the people who were doing scientific inquiry were experts in an academic field called wisdom. Wisdom collected sayings about how the world works or how the world ought to work, how to live our lives, observations about how we sometimes fail. We have entire books of the Bible that are like lab reports from this ancient discipline of wisdom. It's called wisdom literature: Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Songs, the book of Job. And so we're going to be looking at what do these ancient lab reports have to tell us. Now, if the three wise men were not astronomers and physicists and biologists, and instead were economists, like I was trained to be, they would each have had 3 hands. The reason for that, if you ask an economist, they'll often say, well, on the one hand, the market might go up. But on the other hand, the market might go down. But on the other hand, the market might just stay the same. Economists never like to tell you what will happen, only what the possibilities are. Now, when I got my training at New College of Florida in economics and math, and then my master's degree at University of Florida in finance, I then got a job on Wall Street in New York City, and I went up to New York City to live with 2 other Florida Gators. Now, if you've ever shopped for real estate in New York City, you count the number of people who are going to live in one apartment, and then you subtract 1. That's the number of bedrooms you're looking for. You can't afford it otherwise. Even a fat cat banker can't afford to have a bedroom for everyone. So we draw straws, and whoever draws the short straw in New York City sleeps in the living room. Guess what straw I drew? I lived for 2 years in the living room of an apartment, and we were trying to decide where we wanted to live, and then we came to this one apartment, and we looked at ourselves and we said, it's a little bit more in rent. It's another $100 in rent. But if we pass this up, we will regret it the rest of our lives. And that's because we called it affectionately the view. And here is a picture of my window in my living room bedroom. And you can see through the windows there what's called the 8th wonder of the world, the Brooklyn Bridge. So I took this picture from my apartment window. And every night, I would work sometimes till 2 or 3 in the morning. I routinely worked 7 days a week, 80, 100 hours a week. And I would come home, I'd walk home at 2 or 3 in the morning, and I'd be exhausted. And I'd have to do it all again in about 5 or 6 hours. But before I went to bed, no matter how tired I was, I said to myself, just look out your window for 10 seconds and soak it in, because you're going to remember this view the rest of your life. That was the view at nighttime. This was the view at daytime. Just magnificent. One of the most beautiful bridges, one of the strongest bridges, one of the most innovative bridges ever built. The Brooklyn Bridge was finally completed after about 13 or 14 years in 1883. It was a marvel. The very first steel cable suspension bridge in the world. Previous suspension bridges had been built out of different materials of wire, some even chain, where if one link in the chain broke, the whole bridge would be put in jeopardy. It was astonishing to people. The first true skyscraper connecting what were then two separate cities, two of the largest cities in the country in 1883, separated by the cold, deep, wide East River. Manhattan on the west, Brooklyn on the east. Until that moment, the only way you could get from one side to the other was not Allison's subway that she would take under the water, but only ferry rides over the water. A man named John Roebling, who invented this process of making steel cable, was the one who won the blueprints. He designed the beautiful Gothic arches of the bridge to be, like he said, a gateway into the new century, the 20th century, full of possibility. He designed it incredibly to span 1,600 feet uninterrupted, without a pier in the middle, so that boats could travel underneath. Suspension bridges, which were new technology at the time, are now well known for their physical properties. They work using the physical properties of compression and tension. How do you span such a long way, 1,600 feet over the cold, dark waters of the East River without a pier? Well, you can see there's these main cables and then little cables that connect the roadbed to the main cables. Those cables are held tight with the weight of the bridge going through the force of tension up to the main wires. The tension then spreads up to the beautiful towers and then pulls the towers down through the process of compression. What keeps the towers from falling into the East River is there is an equal and opposite tension of the main cables that then connects the towers to 60,000-ton anchors anchored into Brooklyn and Manhattan that keeps everything in equilibrium. 100,000 cars, 5,000 pedestrians cross this 130-year-old bridge every day. It's an amazing story of how it was created. But when I read the story of tension and compression, I think you might as well just be talking about my own life. That's the day in the life of David Alexander Kling, pastor at large. Every day I'm pulled in so many different directions, tension. Every day I feel the weight of my responsibilities, compression. It's something that I think all of us feel. It's something that I think when we turn the calendar and we start reading people's Facebook posts of, oh, it's a new decade, I'm going to take the bull by the horns, I'm going to turn a new leaf over, write a new chapter in my biography. And I'm like, I'm just glad I survived Saturday. New decade? It can feel overwhelming. Which is why I think it's good to study the properties of a powerful bridge like the Brooklyn Bridge, about what it takes to be resilient. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with your life is just show up to work again. Just show up for a relationship again, even when it's hard. And it's a wisdom, a science, that today's lab report from King Solomon teaches us about in the book of wisdom called Ecclesiastes, chapter 9, beginning with verse 7. Solomon says, "Go, eat your food with gladness, and drink your wine with a joyful heart, for God has already approved what you do. Always be clothed in white." That's the party clothes of the ancient world. "Always be clothed in white, and always anoint your head with oil. Enjoy life with your wife, whom you love, all the days of this meaningless life that God has given you under the sun. All your meaningless days. For this is your lot in life, and in your toilsome labor under the sun. Whatever your hands finds to do, do it with all your might. For in the realm of the dead, where you are going, there is neither working, nor planning, nor knowledge, nor wisdom. I have seen something else under the sun. The race is not to the swift, or the battle to the strong, nor does food come to the wise, or wealth to the brilliant, or favor to the learned, but time and chance happen to them all. Moreover, no one knows when their hour will come. As fish are caught in a cruel net, or birds are taken in a snare, so people are trapped by evil times that fall unexpectedly upon them. I also saw under the sun this example of wisdom that greatly impressed me. There was once a small city with only a few people in it, and a powerful king came against it, surrounded it, and built huge siege works against it. Now there lived in that city a man poor but wise, and he saved the city by his wisdom. But nobody remembered that poor man. So I said, wisdom is better than strength, but the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are no longer heeded. But the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, this is a bizarre lab report. The findings would seem to be mixed and complex, not immediately yielding a pretty diagram or model. But something to keep in mind with wisdom literature in the ancient world is that unlike self-help books that you would buy today, or even perhaps a scientific journal, they are not a monologue. Wisdom literature is a dialogue written by scientists with three hands, telling you what will happen on the one hand and the other hand, leaving it to the reader to listen carefully, to live in the tension of the different viewpoints, and to feel the compression of the responsibility from God to live your life well. We read here from Solomon, go party. Always put on your tuxedo at the start of every day. Carpe diem. Life is short. But whatever you find, work hard at it. But your life is meaningless. And even if you make the right decisions, which by the way are more powerful than armies, you may never be remembered for it. Harsh, but probably true. Which of us hasn't had the experience of working really hard and then seeing the fruits of your labors? I could not believe I got a job on Wall Street after interviewing for it. But that's the way life works. If you work hard at an interview, sometimes you get the job. But we all have had an experience that's just plain unfair. You work hard, and from something you can't even predict, everything unravels, and you're worse off than you were at the beginning. Sometimes there's even somebody wicked in your life, somebody who betrays you, somebody who lies and therefore gets rewarded, while you, in honesty, lower down on the totem pole. One of the things I think is most confusing about this lab report is the word meaningless. Why is Solomon saying that life is meaningless when it's full of great work and joy and relationships? Well, it's the Hebrew word hevel, which Solomon uses in many different ways. But the word hevel means just a breath, a single puff of air that's in your lungs one moment and out the next. Gone forever, not remembered for the oxygen it nourished you with. That's what life is like. How many of us are beneficiaries of people who have dedicated their lives for our benefit, but we don't remember their names or their achievements? They have been washed down the East River of time and death. Which of us has not felt the feeling of human frailty? That there are things we'd love to be able to do, but we lack the time or the resources or the physical strength to do it. That's the acknowledgement that our lives, if not perhaps meaningless, are nevertheless a breath, fleeting, fragile. It draws us right into the story of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, stronger than the lives of those who toiled to make it. It's incredible that it was built at all, and it is an incredible testimony of the resilience of 3 scientists, 3 engineers. John Roebling was the designer. He was on the banks of the East River with his surveying equipment in the 1870s, right after the Civil War. And as he was surveying, one of the ferries came to him from the Brooklyn side and went amiss. It crushed his leg, and it had to be amputated. Within weeks, the architect had died before the first work had even begun. Against every expectation, the committee in charge decided to give the most expensive, most complex engineering project in the country to his 33-year-old son, a veteran of the Civil War, a colonel who had faced the horrors of Gettysburg and was trained as an engineer, took up the pen where his father left it and began supervising the construction of his father's plans. Things had to be done that were never contemplated before. First of all, there was the problem of how to sink these enormous towers into the cold, deep river. The Manhattan side is over 100 feet deep. The son, Washington Roebling, figured out that in Europe they had designed a new technology called a caisson, which created an airlocked chamber that descended into the mud of the river. Air was pumped into the chamber where workers could work by hand, shoveling out the mud and rock and silt until they finally hit rock bottom. The laborers worked for years, but something mysterious began to happen. The workers began to get sick. If you've ever taken a flight, you know that your ears will pop as air pressure changes. Well, it works the other way as you go down into the water. Experienced scuba divers now know that you cannot ascend from deep ocean water too quickly to the surface, or you will get a disease called the bends. Nitrogen will enter your bloodstream, and it can be fatal. This was totally unknown in the 1870s, as workers began to die from strange conditions. Finally, in the midst of an emergency, when one of the caissons caught fire, the chief engineer, Washington Roebling, heroically, just like in the Battle of Gettysburg, went down into the caisson to save people, came quickly back up, and he never walked again. He succumbed to the bends, decompression sickness. Once again, with the chief architect and engineer bedridden, paralyzed, it looked like perhaps the bridge would falter and not be built. If it were not for one other person in the story, another great scientist who showed resilience by continuing to show up for work. And against every expectation and social structure of the time, that was Washington's wife, Emily Roebling. Although she had never been to college, she learned the higher mathematics required to interpret the blueprints. It was she that tested and calibrated the angles and the strength of the construction as it went on in the ensuing decade. It was she that wheeled and dealed with the corrupt New York City politicians when time and time again they tried to halt or to make the bridge worse. And on the final day, when it was all complete and her paralyzed husband lay in bed, it was Emily Roebling who took the first carriage ride across the Great Bridge. Your weakest intention today is stronger. Let me say that again. Your weakest action today is stronger than your weakest intention tomorrow. Solomon tells us that life is for the living. This bridge was not built on good intentions, but on powerful, resilient action, day after day, year after year, in the face of adversity. Sometimes it's unseen consequences like sickness or weather or fire, but other times it's human wickedness. The bid for who would make the steel wire should have gone to Roebling's own company. He was the inventor and the patent holder for steel wire. But the New York City political machine got involved, and instead, one of the politician's friends, a man named Haight in New Jersey, received the contract. Roebling said that would be fine as long as every wagon load of steel wire was tested for strength before it went to the construction of the bridge. For 1 year, the wire from the Haight Company went into the bridge until one day, one of the cables snapped, sending 2 people to their death. An inquiry was begun, and it was discovered that it was true that every day a wagon load of steel wire arrived from New Jersey to be tested. But it was also true that it was the same wagon load of wire every day being tested. The Haight Company sent a load of perfect steel every day to Brooklyn to be tested, and then rather than proceeding to the build site, turned around backwards, went back to New Jersey in a circle, and came back the next day with the same exact load of wire. Meanwhile, workers were working at great danger to themselves, laying wire that had been untested onto the structure of the bridge for a full year. The company had defrauded the city of New York by $300,000. And the trustees came to Roebling's bedside while he was sick with their hats in their hands, asking, can work on the bridge continue, or do we need to abandon the project? Is the evil that has been wrought more powerful than the wisdom of the plans? Roebling got out his pencil and went to work. Even though only a handful of the wires that had been put up in the last year were sound, Roebling said, I designed this bridge to be 8 times as strong as it needs to be. If we make sure that every wagon load from this day on is tested, it will still be 4 times as strong as it needs to be. And the work can continue. To this day, there is fraud in amongst the strength of the Brooklyn Bridge. It's what Solomon tells us, that the quiet words of the wise are more to be heeded than the shouts of a ruler of fools. Wisdom is stronger than evil. God's plans for you are stronger than any mistakes, any frauds that may be in your past, still worked into the structure of your bridge. But as you think about how to be resilient in 2020, I want to offer 3 tips. The first tip is a question of where does your joy come from? Every night before I went to bed, no matter how hard my work was in the bank, I got that spark, that 10-second spark of joy looking at that beautiful bridge down below me. No matter how bad things are going for you right now, no matter what challenges you are facing, there is a small joy that you can tune into to draw strength and resilience from, to show up and do it all again tomorrow. Solomon says, enjoy the relationships you have, your wife, your family. Enjoy parties. Enjoy fun. But the next question is, who's on your team? Where's your joy, and who's on your team? When you die, like Solomon says you will, and get to heaven, and you tell God, I did it all on my own, God's not going to say, good job, you get to go to super heaven. That's not the way this works. There's no extra points for doing it by yourself. Pull a team of people around you who will help you stay resilient and show up day after day. Solomon mentions your spouse as a person. You may not be married, but it should be somebody else, a close friend or a colleague who you can lean on in the same way that there's not one cable, but 5,000 cables pulling the compression and tension of this bridge so it can hold 100,000 cars every day of work in its 130-year life. Don't be an alone cable. Pull someone in to help you, just like Washington Roebling had Emily. And the final question is, what's your foundation? Where do you find joy? Who's on your team? And what's your foundation? The thing that makes this bridge work is not that these cables hold 100,000 cars every day, but that they transfer the 100,000 car weight every day, day after day, century after century, up the cables, over the tower, and down to an important engineering object called planet Earth. And planet Earth is a foundation that can hold as many cars as we choose to build on it. I will tell you that my foundation is my relationship with Jesus Christ. And the days that I skip my 5 minutes of silence, listening to Him, hearing from Him, His strength for my life, His joy for my life, those are the days that all the stress and tension and compression of the 100,000 cars that run through my heart stay there. And I'm like the cables trying to hold the weight myself. You will release the tension, the compression in your life by handing it over, by giving it to God, the God who came to us as a human being in Jesus Christ and said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." As we come to this table today, we acknowledge that all of us are in the bad wagon load. Every one of us has fraud in our life that we bring before a perfect God, a resilient God, who will show up every day for you. As we come to this table, we acknowledge that we are sinners in need of a Savior who is resilient for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.